Now that's what I'm talking about. This is the Who I was waiting for. This is the episode I was waiting for. This is what I feel like Doctor Who does best. Mysterious, unnerving horror. A single unknown entity with terrifying powers stalking our hero. The windswept shores of Wales is the perfect setting for this type of story. As they say, it's on the border between the land and the sea, a liminal space where the veil between our reality and the next is extra thin. The visuals conjure the ideas of old-time magic and witchcraft. And the cinematography in this episode is just gorgeous. Hats off to the cinematographer in this episode and the director. They knocked it out of the park. This is probably the best looking episode of the season, hands down. All of the real world locations, without the need for sets or CGI or the volume or green screen, everything feels organic and real. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, eerie episode. Shout out to the Doctor's outfit, which is excellent and appears, in my eyes at least, to be an homage, a split homage between Patrick Troughton's duds in Fury from the Deep and Sarah Jane Smith's yellow raincoat in the Sontaran Experiment. I guess the major twist right off the bat, that the old lady was Ruby from the distant future, but the how and why of it all kept me intrigued and invested through the end. Having Susan Twist show up so early and so overtly was a nice surprise. I was really intrigued to see her go talk to the other old lady, because I was kind of assuming at this point that the old lady may be Susan Twist. You know, maybe Susan Twist is Ruby as an old lady. You know, it could be. So I really wanted to see her go talk to the other old lady and then see how she reacted when she realized that she had the same face. And the fact that she looks terrified and then runs away just confirmed that idea in my head. This episode is full of red herrings and misdirections and keeps you constantly guessing out what kind of story it's going to be. It seems like mysterious old women have become the mystery box of this season. We now have Mrs. Flood, Susan Twist, Ruby's mother, not necessarily old, but mysterious, and then the old Ruby herself in this episode. The visual of the old woman always standing the exact same distance away and repeating the same gestures over and over again like she's on a loop was truly unnerving. It kind of reminded me of the ghosts from Under the Lake Before the Flood. The episode holds his cards close to his chest right up until the closing credits, never giving you a full explanation of the events that transpired before you. Some might find this frustrating or incomplete, but I like it. I think this feeds into some of the best horror stories ever. Midnight, my absolute favorite story from modern Doctor Who, also written by Russell T. Davies, has a similar result where you don't ever find out what the creature was that assaulted them. You never know. The mystery is always there, which makes it extra scary. You can't forget the fear of the unknown is one of the most effective types of fears that you can inject into your story. It reminds me of a quote by Stephen King, which I heard for the first time in another excellent supernatural horror story, the video game Alan Wake.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end.
Whether or not we ever receive satisfying answers to the mysteries presented in this story remains to be seen, but I feel like this episode still works perfectly well as a standalone, creepy story of a woman being pulled through supernatural events throughout the course of her entire life. The atmosphere of the pub is on point. The unfriendly patrons and the ghost stories are a staple as old as time. There's countless stories that have this hook at the beginning.
Large Marge sent me.
But it's still very effective in this moment. They set the tone of mystery and magic and witchcraft being at play. So even when they break out laughing at the end, and just act like a bunch of assholes who are taking Ruby on a ride, it doesn't dissipate the feeling of dread and horror that they've evoked throughout the scene. At first, I thought the entire story was just going to take place in or around the pub, another base under siege tale. Little did I know how expansive this story would become. I love how big this story gets, starting and covering just a few days, then weeks, then years and decades, and eventually Ruby's entire life. It harkens back to Amy trapped in quarantine in The Girl Who Waited, or Bill trapped in the Cyber City in World Enough in Time. I like these types of stories because they give the companion some space to really spread their wings and play a character going through a series of tragedies and losses over an extended period of time. Millie Gibson handles herself effectively. She takes the spotlight, traveling through an entire lifetime of emotions and basically living out all the stages of grief throughout the years. And I really feel for her as she's coldly abandoned by everyone she loves and cares about around her one by one, until she's left completely isolated and alone. The hardest hitting gut punch of all, of course, being when her mother abandons her and then leaves her with the devastating words that not even her real mother wanted her. The gimmick or hook of this particular monster is really interesting. Anyone who approaches her, be they a stranger or a loved one or a specially trained military unit, will always stop and look directly at Ruby and then run away in terror. It seems as if they experience some sort of a psychic incursion or a break, which fills their minds with some sort of knowledge, some sort of existential dread, a realization that Ruby is the source of something deeply wrong with their world. Not only do they run away in utter terror, but when Ruby tries to interact with them later, they suddenly become cold and mean towards her, almost disgusted. They almost seem resentful of her, like they've been made aware that her mere existence is an abomination or an affront to them in some way. Maybe going near the time-traveling future Ruby awakens some sort of primal knowledge that she is undoing their reality and erasing the timeline that they are a part of. It gives the episode a nightmarish quality, where logic and reason are suspended in order to turn the entire world into a cold and hostile place. This is an inversion of most other Doctor Who monsters. Generally, when a monster appears, the MO is to run away from them. But in this story, the monster always maintains its distance, and instead, it drives away all friends, allies, and loved ones of Ruby, leaving her alone and isolated. This draws on a different sort of deep-seated fear, the fear of being alone. Even when people don't overtly approach the woman and run away, she is a constant distraction in Ruby's life, preventing her from being able to hold down any sort of relationship for an extended period of time. It's absolutely heartbreaking when Ruby, as an old lady, declares that
everyone has abandoned me my whole life. But I haven't been alone for 65 years.
I like how Ruby grows used to the old woman always being there as friends and loved ones fall away one by one. As someone who is now isolated from the rest of the world, she draws a strange sort of comfort from the ever-present companion that she has. She almost develops a sort of Stockholm syndrome to the woman, who in a way is holding her entire life captive. She also doesn't attempt to ride a boat or a plane out of fear of killing the old woman. She says that she fears if the old woman dies, she might as well. It's almost as if she's subconsciously aware that the old woman is her. The fact that at the end of the story, she says that she's been to Wales 3 times, and then it's only after the Doctor questions her about it, and she gives the confused realization that the 3rd time is now, that we realize that this was definitely a time-altering event.
Oh, you know what? I've been to Wales twice. Hey, you know what? I've been to Wales 3 times.
I like how Ruby latches so strongly onto the Prime Minister, Mad Jack, and rushes off to go and try to save the world, almost delusionally so. It just shows how desperate she is to find some sort of meaning out of all of this pain and loss that she's had in her life, to make the tragedy that's befallen her have some sort of greater purpose. The way she uses the woman as a weapon or a superpower against the scumbag Prime Minister is awesome, and I did not see it coming. For some reason, even when they stepped out onto the football field, I didn't make the connections in my head. It's a truly tense moment when she steps onto the field and starts walking backwards, and it slowly dawns on you what she's doing. The tension rises because she stepped out there on the 55-yard line. Why didn't she step a few yards to the left and then start walking out? Because all those guys with the guns and people screaming at her, like, she could have gotten sniped and it would be all over at that moment. But, you know, maybe she's not a sports person and she's not really aware of yard lines and all that, and she just felt like she needed to do in that moment. Whatever. It made for an effectively tense scene. When she scared away the Prime Minister, it was truly a fist-pumping moment that brought a much-needed jolt of levity and happiness into an otherwise very somber and depressing story. The fact that the woman doesn't depart afterwards just adds to the sense of hopelessness that Ruby will never be rid of this woman or understand why she's there. Ruby's speech to the TARDIS at the end of the story brought a tear to my eye.
And I think at the end, I have to go. Because that's very you, isn't it? My old friend.
Even after all these years, even after a lifetime of isolation and loss, hope still perseveres in Ruby's heart, keeping her spirit alive and her life full of meaning in spite of it all. I don't even know why it touched me so deeply. It should have been too strange and alienating. I don't even understand how it happened to a degree, but for some reason it just struck a chord on an emotional level. I think this is because loneliness is an emotion that we can all relate to some degree, whether it be the fear of the loss of a loved one or a friend, or have experienced that loss in the form of a death or a breakup or a simple drifting apart. This story plays off of these emotions effectively, anchored by a very strong performance by Millie Gibson, who travels through the stages of grief on her journey to ultimate acceptance and peace throughout her life. Of course, this being Doctor Who, she is ultimately rewarded for her stubborn and unwavering grasp on hope, being allowed to travel back in time and undo the tragic story that we've just witnessed. How she has this particular power remains a mystery for now. I suspect that we'll learn more about the how and why of this situation in future episodes, so it won't be a mystery forever, but even if it were, I'd be okay with that, because it was such an effective story. However, I think they will explain this because there's just too many unanswered questions, and it appears to tie way too strongly into Ruby's mystery box storyline. A big major thing that I haven't really discussed yet is the fact that the Doctor completely disappears, which is different from what happens to everyone else in the story. Everyone else in the story has to go and interact or be close to the future version of Ruby in order to have their psychic break where they learn some sort of uncanny existential fear and run away in terror. But the Doctor just immediately disappears completely and leaves his TARDIS unattended for decades. He's just gone. So what happened there? It seems to be that stepping in the fairy circle caused this event to happen. But the fairy circle does not seem to be directly related to Ruby's solution to the problem. There's nothing in the episode that ties the fairy circle to Ruby's ability to travel back in time. It just seems to be an ability that she has. Upon death, it seems. It seems like she grows to old age, and when she dies, rather than, shucking off this mortal coil, she has the opportunity to travel backwards in her own timeline and undo some event. Now, is this because she's an alien, or she's some sort of a time paradox, impossibility? We don't know. But the story leaves us with major unanswered questions that I'm fairly confident we'll get some sort of an explanation for in the future. Now, will the answers be as satisfying as what we, the viewers, were able to conjure in our minds as potential explanations for the supernatural events that occurred in the story? I hope so. Probably not. Probably not. RTD tends to generally fumble the ball a little bit in his finales and his explanations, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we'll get good closure as to why the events of the story occurred. Although I'd be completely fine if we never learned it ever, because I like the unknown of it all. It feels more like a spooky, mysterious nightmare that way. But yeah, major mystery. What happened to the Doctor? Where did he go? Why was he erased from reality because they stepped on a fairy circle? Who put the fairy circle there? And why does Ruby have the ability to, upon old age and death, travel back in time and change events to be more in her favor? Also, why are people terrified of Ruby after they interact with her future version? They're not scared of the future lady. They turn and look at Ruby and then run in terror and then don't want to have anything to do with her afterwards. So what is scaring these people so badly about this peppy, young, 20-something, seemingly very nice and ordinary girl? I give this episode an A. I was thinking about A-, but I think I'm just giving it a straight A. I really like the story. I think it stands up there with the best of the Doctor Who's. I'm always a sucker for the mysterious, artsy episodes in the season. They tend to hit well for me. So this may not be to everyone's taste, but I personally think this was the most emotionally affecting, scary, chilling, and visually beautiful and twisty, well-constructed, well-paced story of the season so far. I really like Boom a lot. Boom was great too. And this episode was even better, which makes the season feel like it's really going for an upswing, which excites me. I feel like for the first time, really, I'm like actually very excited about this season since it started. So yeah, A, no question. A episode, favorite episode of the season so far. Next week looks interesting. Dot and Bubble. Looks like we're taking on social media and the overload of apps and maybe some VR. We're getting some VR commentary, maybe reality TV show stuff. It was giving me a little bit of bad wolf vibes, but I think it's actually just more about a society of people who all are literally walking around with a encasing bubble of internet bullshit around their head 24/7. That actually intrigues me. That feels like it feels like it's going to be another satirical social commentary story, which I'm totally down with. These stories don't have to all be spooky and dark and gloomy for me to like them. I like they can be colorful and crazy. It's fine. They just have to be well written. That's all I care about. They have to be well written, and they have to be fun to watch. And I am totally down for an episode that is going to take a jab at internet culture and that kind of stuff because that's a target that needs some jabbing. That's what I was saying. That's a target. The state of the internet nowadays, pop that bubble. Pop it. Okay, final thing. Tinfoil hat theory space. I'm just going to run through this really fast because I have not been like seriously theory crafting the way that some people have. I'm just going to throw this out there. They mentioned the Ronnie in Space Baby.
The Ronnie!
You may or may not be aware, the Ronnie is a Time Lord villain from the classic Doctor Who series. She got name dropped, and there are several mysterious old ladies who seem to have time travel abilities. So, you put one and one together, and that might be the situation. Now, the Ronnie's interesting because she is not just like a female version of the Master, which we have already had at this point anyway with Missy. The Master is a power-hungry, insane, somewhat nihilistic, anarchic agent of chaos. Okay, that's the Master's MO. Whereas the Ronnie is more of a cold-hearted, calculating, scientifically minded Time Lord who sees the entire universe as basically her petri dish to do whatever experiments she wants. On a grand scale, sometimes she'll take over an entire planet to try to conduct an experiment. She doesn't care as long as she gets the results she wants. So, with that being said, with my tinfoil hat firmly fastened to the top of my head, I'm going to just throw out this random theory that Susan Twist and Mrs. Flood are both different iterations of the Ronnie, and Ruby is a Ronnie experiment, a time experiment, perhaps a time paradox experiment. Kind of like what the Master did with the Paradox Machine in the end of Season 3. Some sort of a time experiment on a grand scale, and Ruby is the core of her experiment. She's Mrs. Flood because she set up camp near her experiment in order to monitor it.
Nothing to do with me.
Later in the story, she may experience some sort of a deadly injury and be forced to regenerate into Susan Twist. And then as the Susan Twist version of the Ronnie, she may very well get pulled into a time stream and fragmented across time and space in a very similar manner to Clara and her Impossible Girl journey in Season 7. Now, the only problem with this theory, as far as I can see it, is that it doesn't jive well at all with the other major season-long mystery box that we've been playing with, which is The One Who Waits. The One Who Waits seems more like a godlike being, a fantastical, supernatural being that does not obey the laws of science or physics. They've been name-dropped or referenced by the likes of the Toymaker or the Maestro, who seem to fear them. I can't picture either of those characters fearing the Ronnie, who's just another Time Lord, considering how flippantly and dismissively they treat the Doctor. If it was a returning classic villain, a better fit for The One Who Waits would be, say, Sutek, or the Black Guardian, some ancient evil with vast powers that really presented a problem for the Doctor during their run. So having a all-powerful, fantastical being seems like the antithesis of what the Ronnie represents, which is cold logic and science. How could this all be connected together? Perhaps the fantastical supernatural powers of a godlike deity like Sutek could be going up against the more scientifically minded, cold reasoning powers of the Ronnie in a grand battle at the end of the season with the Ruby and the Doctor in the middle of it all. That's my big, ridiculous theory that's going to definitely be proven wrong once we get to the end of the season, but that's where I'm staking my flag right now. That's my big, crazy theory. Do what you will with it. If you have crazy theories yourself, if you got tinfoil hat theories, please drop them in the comments. I really want to hear what people think is going on now. I feel like this episode, while I did say that I am totally fine with the mystery never being solved because I think this is a great standalone episode as it is, it also unquestionably set my theory crafting mind ablaze. And I started trying to spin all the ways that all the pieces could fit together in this story. So, drop your comments below. Let's start getting some crazy theories going. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say about this episode. This is my favorite episode of the season. It seems like Doctor Who's starting to feel like it's really back for me. I wish they started with these 2 episodes we just watched instead of the other 2. But what are you going to do? Doctor Who feels good right now. It feels back. It feels right. It feels like it's firing on all cylinders. And I am hyped that it will continue on this upward trajectory through the finale. Those are my hopes. So, with a renewed sense of hope in my heart, I bid you adieu for this week. Until next time, Kay, signing out.